Good evening. Welcome. My name is Bonnie Buckingham, and I am the moderator here at the University Congregational Church, and I'm the executive director of the Community Food and Agriculture Coalition. I want to thank all of you for your interest and for taking time to come here tonight and to talk about solutions to the sometimes daunting and overwhelming issues of global warming, peak oil supplies, and economic devastation around the globe. We do live in interesting times, and we often feel powerless from our own vantage point. But tonight is not really about the problems we face, but instead we're kind of changing the paradigm a little bit and thinking instead about, in light of all of the issues and the problems that we have and all the overlapping concerns that we may have, there really are solutions. And we have the power to make significant change right here in our own communities and with other like-minded communities around the country and also around the world. I work for an organization that began about 7 years ago to change the way Missoulians feed ourselves. The Community Food and Agriculture Coalition has been working to relocalize our food and farming economy. We have initiated several projects that have helped to bring control of our food system back to our community. And CPAC aims to build a sustainable local food system that nourishes people of all income levels, supports farmers and ranchers on the land, and keeps dollars circulating in our community. CPAC is a membership organization that engages our members to take control of their food system, both at the policy level, both locally and nationally, and also at the community project level. And I don't know if you had a chance to look around in the narthex out there, but CPAC is just one of a multitude of organizations here in Missoula that are working together towards sustainability in many different areas. And I think we Missoulians are people that really care and that are innovative and really relentless in our quest for sustainability and resiliency. Tonight I'm also here representing a kind of new movement here in Missoula, and the concept of transition towns actually began in the UK and Ireland a number of years ago, and the movement has begun to spread across the United States as well. As far as I know, there are 2 study groups that have formed here in Missoula, and I've been meeting with one of them for the last few months, and we're happy to sponsor this presentation tonight. And really, we're looking for this movement to grow and hope that you are here because you want to be involved, and please afterwards be sure and sign up at the table if you haven't already, because there certainly is room for more people to be involved, and I think we want to stay as informed about each other as we go along so we can begin to really synthesize the movement as it grows. We all have a role to play, and we can build on our collective activities and successes and create stronger connections and more involvement to ensure that we are resilient and visionary in our approaches. And tonight I'm honored to be able to introduce a man who really does need no introduction to people here in Missoula. Dr. Steve Running has been a visionary leader here at the University of Montana since 1979 for his University Regents Professor of Ecology. And I'm not going to read his entire bio, it's quite extensive, but he has published over 270 scientific articles and 2 books. And in 2007, he shared the Nobel Peace Prize as chapter leader author for the 4th assessment of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. And his essay, The 5 Stages of Climate Grief, is widely quoted in popular media. I personally know Dr. Running as a fellow kayaker and avid bike rider, and I'm proud to count him as a friend. So I'm looking forward to what he brings us tonight. Welcome.
Yeah, I'm more than happy to not give a talk about climate. I suspect by now I've been giving climate talks for at least a half dozen years in town here. And so, and I can't say there's any particularly good news in the climate front. We're continuing to see the trends that we first identified in the IPCC report. And so as I thought about what I'd talk about tonight, I was sure that an audience like this already has heard all the climate stuff. And so what I thought I would do is kind of a wider commentary about what I see that the problems that we're facing in society, and at least turning the corner to getting more proactive about the solution set we want to look at. And of course, it's always kind of a risk to get out beyond the topics that you're confident in. And so, but I'm tenured, so what can you do to me? And so, yeah, I will, I'll go through a number of things I have been thinking about that are very much compatible with the transition town concept, and just then end with some questions and discussion on what we should be doing. And I won't say anything about climate. There's not one climate slide in this whole set. I love it. Can we claim victory? I think they just caved and are sawing those things in pieces. And we have so few victories that I figured, man, I'm going to have at least 1 second of celebration. I think they've caved in on the moronic idea of hauling those over Lolo Pass in the dead of winter. You could tell that some Houston oil barons thought this up in a high-rise in Houston when their first load was going to be in February. I mean, they could have stopped anybody on the streets of Missoula and said, well, when do you think we should try our first haul? And I'll bet not one person would have told them February. So anyway, so that's a little bit of local good news. That another bit of, I guess I'm struggling for good news, so I call this good news too. About a week ago, 2 weeks ago, and a lot of you may not have noticed this, but it was in a bit of news. Jon Stewart led his whole broadcast the night after this, and basically it was a group at UC Berkeley that had been kind of cynical about the IPCC climate trend data analysis, and they basically said that they'd sit down and do it right. And they got serious funding from really the climate denier sort of crowd. The Koch brothers put half their budget in, and so this was really the climate deniers out to prove that global warming really wasn't real, and those climate scientists were basically a bunch of buffoons. Well, here you see the NASA Jim Hansen's curve. Here you see the NOAA curve. Here you see the Hadley Center curve. And here you see their brand new curve. Can you see the difference? And that was the whole point. And I give the group credit. They said that. And so it did make the press just a couple of weeks ago that this climate skeptic group put a lot of effort into a whole new analysis of the global land temperatures and discovered and and stated that they reaffirmed what the IPCC report had found and published before. If you have climate skeptic friends, and probably most of us even have relatives, you might point this out to them, because it isn't that the data's new, but for people who openly stated that their goal was to shoot down the climate science, to come and say, well, it looks like they were right, is kind of a big deal politically. So I think that's another bit of good news. Now we'll return to reality. I like to use this slide. It's an artist's drawing, kind of conceptual drawing of humanity consuming the planet. And I have a quote under there written by Charles David Keeling, the author of the Mauna Loa Keeling Curve, the most famous earth science data set in the world. And Dave Keeling in 1968 wrote that the rise in CO2 was proceeding so slowly, we probably never would know it was a problem in our lifetime. And you think he knew more about CO2 than anybody else on Earth. And before he died, he knew how wrong he had been in this conclusion. And his own data set proved it. We absolutely know that we are on our way to a global carbon crisis, and that awakening really has occurred only in about the last 20 years. And so in the long sweep of history, this is a pretty recent discovery by humanity that we're on a path that is not sustainable. Now another bit of recent news. This is the time series of carbon emission by the major emitting countries from 1990 till not quite the present. China overtook us in this contest just a year or so ago. How many of you heard in the news, I think within the last week, that 2010 set a new emission record? A number of you saw that. And yeah, so we're not, when you measure in an absolute sense the carbon emission track record of the world, we're making no progress at all. We have to be honest with ourselves about that. At this point, we're not making a dent in the trajectory of carbon emissions on a global basis. And of course, we got maybe some infinitesimal bit of relief when China overtook us as a nation in carbon emissions, but we know darn well that on a per capita basis, this is us, this is the high income average, this is the world average, China's down here, way down here. On a per person basis, us and Saudi Arabia and Australia are by far the per capita carbon emitting leaders of the world. And yet we continue to have a fraction of our society encouraging more. And it's interesting to see the spin that the coal industry is putting on nowadays. Like this one, clean coal, cool. There's some of the detractors you see, Google image searches are just amazing nowadays. Any topic like this of any kind of particularly controversy, you just do a Google image search and your computer explodes with an endless array of these sort of images. I kind of like, as we come to Christmas time, is she so naughty she deserves a lump of coal for the rest of her life? To just give a bit of magnitude, any of these big power plants they burn one train car of coal every 5 minutes. And so to give you just a little bit of a sense of how fast a big power plant goes through coal. And I find it impossible to understand how it can be logical and efficient to dig up coal in eastern Montana, drive a train right through Missoula. I see these trains as I come to campus at least 3 days a week. There's a coal train going right over the top of me. That's being shipped all the way to China and burned, and it economically adds up to somebody. It's just unbelievable how that could be worth it to haul a material with that unit value that is so low, to haul it that far, and they're still willing to do it. And of course, this transition town really got started on the concept of peak oil. And it's interesting, you can't read this, but this was the cover of National Geographic 7 years ago. So this isn't new, this is 2004. We've been skirting the peak oil issue now for a number of years. This is a useful graph to recognize these are the oil discoveries in the past. And you see back in the 30s, 40s, even the 60s, there were huge big discoveries relative to the global annual consumption. We were finding 10 times as much oil every year as we were using. So we were literally, putting oil in the bank account, so to speak, on a global basis. Well, in 1990, that turned around. So ever since 1990, every single year, we've found less oil than we've consumed, and we being humanity as a whole, globally. So we've been deficit spending now for 20 years in conventional oil already. And of course, what's now happening is what they call unconventional oil. And so I can't remember, I think the definition of conventional oil from offshore platforms is something like under 500 feet deep water or something like that. And of course, this was, how many thousand feet deep was this? I can't even remember exactly. But this was unconventional oil because it was deeper than they had regularly gone before. And of course, we know what happened. And I'm afraid as the oil industry pushes harder and harder to go deeper and deeper, we better just get ready for more of these things. They're pushing their technology to the limits. They're inventing new technology to even be able to generate this oil, and stuff's going to go wrong. The easy oil is gone. And so I'm afraid that as long as we continue to be using oil, we're going to continue to see periodic disasters like this occurring. It's just a matter of probability. And of course, then you get more close to home, and this is what's happening just north of us. I've been told that you can tell somebody's politics very clearly up in Alberta by whether they call it tar sands or oil sands. That little nuance tells everything. And so here again, this is unconventional oil. And the processing of this tar, and I think to give you a good mental image of what it starts as tar and sand, it just requires an incredible amount of processing and literally heating it all up to liquefy the tar so it can be separated and then produce normal liquid oil. And this is just, this is about the least efficient type of oil we can get. This is about the bottom of the barrel. And it really illustrates where the world oil supply is headed, when this starts to become viable, somebody better start thinking, how much longer is this game going on? Because we're starting to literally scrape the bottom of the oil barrel as a society, and somebody better start paying attention to what's coming next. I think the very fact that you're all here is you're the type that are paying attention. And so I think the society as a whole needs to recognize that when we start doing this, we don't have hundreds of years of easy oil left to go get. And you recognize I'm not even talking about climate right now. I'm simply talking about oil availability. And so there is just an endless array of books arguing peak oil nowadays. You just can't read them fast enough. And so I'm certainly in no way the only person thinking about this. There are lots and lots of government groups and NGOs that are analyzing this issue, and they're clearly projecting a dramatic decline in oil supply, certainly within the lifetime of all the students here, for sure, within their lifetime, and maybe within decades. What's interesting is how close to the chest some of the biggest oil producers like Saudi Arabia, they don't actually they put on a happy face so that they have lots of oil. You read various commentaries that at least suggest they may not have half the oil that they are implying. And so the oil supply on a global basis is something absolutely people should be paying attention to. Now, one of the things that I've always found quite annoying when the fossil fuel industry starts getting attacked by the alternative energy industry, and they always fight back by, well, our energy is cheap and reliable, and your energy is expensive and intermittent. And what they don't fess up is why their energy is so cheap. And this analysis I just discovered only a couple of months ago. And it simply makes the point that from 2002 to 2008, look at the amount of subsidies and tax breaks fossil fuels got. You can just see as a visual graphic the difference between what the renewable energy sector was getting in tax credits and tax breaks relative to the fossil fuels. And so I find it really quite ironic when sometimes I'll read these commentaries from the oil industry saying that they just want to play on a level playing field. And I think, you know what? Make my day. Let's have a serious level financial playing field on this game, and I don't think they would come out ahead. And this doesn't even include how much of the Pentagon budget is actually to protect oil supply. And you could triple that number right there, triple it every single year. If you include just a fraction of the Pentagon budget that everybody knows completely well is over there in the Middle East protecting the oil supply, and if we didn't need the oil, we would not need that military force. And so when you talk about a financial level playing field for energy, if we had a serious level playing field, alternative energy sources would easily win already. Even at the prices they are now, they'd win already. But you never see discussed an honest level playing field. And it goes deeper than most any analysis normally does. This is one of the best in that regard, in digging deep into all the tax breaks and tax credits that allow them to then generate this supposedly cheap energy. Well, and then there's our financial system. And since I'm a global modeler myself, I found this kind of interesting that Alan Greenspan has a global model too of the world economy, and he discovered a flaw in his model that I perceived as the critical functioning structure that defines how the world works. Are economists always that arrogant that they just figure they know how the world works? Or was this just kind of a misspeak? This was sworn testimony in front of Congress. He wasn't talking off the cuff to Fox News. And so what we're seeing in the last 3 years is a stunning instability in the global economy. And we're still right in the thick of it. If you don't think otherwise, you're not reading your weekly Economist magazine carefully enough, which is my favorite weekly magazine, despite the title. They give a very honest analysis of the state of the world, the state of the environment, and boy, they just week after week after week are saying, man, this house of cards could collapse at any time. It almost did in '08, and they didn't really fix any of the problems. And so there's no shortage of books warning of impending disaster. I mean, I don't think it took me 10 minutes to paste this set together, and I think I haven't read all of these. I've read about half of these and a whole bunch of other ones. I quit reading climate books because there's nothing new. And so I've been off reading these sort of global economics and global strategic books is mostly what I read nowadays. My wife's going to force me to read a novel sometime, but I don't know if I have the attention span for that. But of course, one of the originals here was Collapse. And how many of you know that Jared Diamond has a place right down the Bitterroot, 50 miles away? And the first 50 pages of Collapse is all about Montana. If you haven't read it, it's all about us right here. And he makes the point that humanity is not on a global scale, on a more local scale, has not paid attention in the past to impending environmental disaster until it was too late, and that was the end of them. And he questions at the end of the book, are we smart enough to see global scale signals of the same sort of potential? And the jury's still out on whether we are. And so I certainly like to make this point that wrecking the global economy is nothing compared to wrecking the biosphere. And what I particularly find demoralizing is the world leadership's attention span and strategic planning horizon is so stunningly short. You know, not much beyond the next election cycle. And when you have the sort of scale of issues that we're talking about here, and that we're attempting to look decades and a century into the future, I realize that not very many people are paid to do that. And so I suppose I should feel privileged that my job is to be thinking about the world 50 and 100 years from now, and that's not true of very many people. But the difficult part is once these people that are trying to think 50 and 100 years ahead see a trajectory that doesn't look good, you want to hope that everybody else will listen. And that's what's not going very well so far with society as a whole. And again, what I have encouragement by is when I come to something like this on a night like this and all you people show up. Because clearly you are all trying to think 50 years ahead. So there's a number of, there's different scientific groups trying to mix and match their calculations of planetary resources in a number of ways. One of them is called the human footprint analysis. This footprintnetwork.org is what their handle is. And so they've attempted to calculate the global footprint of humanity and come to the conclusion that we've already overshot the sustainable limit of this the planet right now in our resource consumption. And as a terrestrial scientist, I could dig into their methods and I could poke and complain at assumptions here and there and probably make some arguments that they may be off a little bit here and there, but that really isn't the point. When you're strategically thinking globally in century-long sort of trajectories, the rounding off error here is not the point. The point is, if we're not at planetary capacity, we're probably within sight of it, and we don't even know it. And we better start thinking at this scale of global analysis sooner rather than later. So there's a number of groups that work on this, and I try to read a lot of this material, not just climate material. One of them is this Happy Planet Index, and if you're looking for new things to read, there's ideas here. This is a particularly good book. Selection of essays, just came out 2 years ago. Beyond GDP, the need for new measures of progress. And so this has been I've found it pretty interesting to look at, because these are a set of economists that are basically saying the foundation of at least part of our problem is we have an obsession with economic growth. And of course you watch the news every single night of the week, every single week, and all the national leaders are talking about how we have to start growing again from every country. And so you realize that this mantra of ecologic growth is hardwired into economic planning right now. And the point some of these people are making is part of our problem is we're using a very unfortunate metric of success, namely gross domestic product. And so they have a variety of analyses that can get really quite technical. And these are leading people. This Joseph Stiglitz was a Nobel Prize winner in economics. So these aren't just nobody economists. And this book just came out, Mismeasuring Our Lives, Why GDP is Not Measuring What We Need It to Measure. And of course, Robert Kennedy's quote, GDP measures everything except that which makes life worthwhile. In a way, that one phrase is the bottom line of all of this. And so I've found, at least for me, reading some of this analysis by some of these progressive economists arguing that we're never going to get out of this until we quit evaluating our national progress by these metrics of GDP. Now that might be too technical, too just mumbo-jumbo sort of economic theory for some of you, but I think for some of the others of you, you might find this really interesting to read, because let's face it, our national agendas are set by economics, whether we like it or not, and we need to start redefining some of those economic metrics, because I don't think we're going to get the national strategic planning to start forgetting economics. But I think we could really define a new type of economics, and this is a lot of what these books are arguing. So what are some of the things I see for the future here? And what I see with the global risk and instability, and exactly the bottom line of these transition towns, is that I think this is a very smart time for people to get more self-sufficient in both a personal and certainly in a community way. And we don't want to sit around waiting for Washington to solve our problems, do we? And so I think that it's very good thinking for a community like Missoula to start really working through what are the things that we can kind of, if not disconnect from the world entirely, I don't think we're kidding ourselves about that, but how can we make ourselves less vulnerable and be more self-sufficient right here in as much of our day-to-day living as we can. And so that's really what the Transition Network's overall logic is about. And so it started in the UK. I'm not here representing Transition Network at all, but I wanted to read up on what its origins and principles were. And so it started in the UK, and it's really an organizing kind of framework for how communities can think their way through what their problems are, what their opportunities are, and then basically how to organize themselves to get working on the things that they think are worth doing in their community. And it's a very iterative and solution-focused sort of thinking. It has a number of principles that they suggest here. I like this one particularly, honor the elders. I'm getting to the point where I qualify, so I think that's a particularly good one, don't you? What do you think? Yeah, I'll go for that. I think it provides really a blueprint of what's worked in other communities that I think these groups here in Missoula are trying to work through and see how can we adapt this kind of thinking that's been successful in other places to coordinate what we want to do here. And you can read, actually, some of the material out front gives a better summary than these couple of slides that I put in here. But I think that's really the principles of the transitions logic. And I think I see, before I ever heard of this, I was thinking along these same sort of lines, that communities really should be getting more self-sufficient, and it'll just make us less vulnerable to the sort of things that are going to come down the pike that we can't control. Looking at the megaloads, we couldn't control at all when they cooked up that idea. They never came by and asked us, hey, is it okay if we punch these megaloads through your community? Luckily, we, at least in that case, were able to counterattack, but that isn't always the case. And we just have no idea when the next big idea from some high-rise in Houston will show up. So here's some of my ideas, and I'm completely going off script now, and so who knows what I might say. Kind of like Rick Perry. Or maybe I'll forget the Department of Energy. Of all the departments to close down in the entire government, the Department of Energy. Jeez. All right. So, see, I'm already off message. One of the things that in a way seems ho-hum to people, because we've heard it for enough years about conservation and energy efficiency and oh yeah, we ought to get to work. I don't think people understand how huge of an opportunity there is. And to me, this graph shows that potential right here. This basically illustrates that right today, the per person electric power use in California is about half what it is in the rest of the country. Half! And I've been to California. They don't seem to be suffering too much down there. To me, it tells us what's possible if we, in a very coherent, organized way, got really serious about energy efficiency on a national basis. We could cut in half our electric power use and still live like Californians. How's that? Well, probably don't take that too literally. I'm sure you could go overboard on that. But this, to me, is an incredibly powerful graph. Think of how many coal-fired power plants you could close down if the whole country had this level of efficiency. And we're not talking one bit about how they generate their electric power here. We're simply talking about their day-to-day use of electric power compared to an individual in other parts of the country. And you can say, well, sure, it doesn't get cold down there. Well, the highest electric power use in the country nowadays is summer air conditioning. It is not winter heating. And so I find this to be a graph with a lot of hope in it because it tells us how massively we could save energy. You know, on all the things that we've been hearing about before. And yet, you know, every one of these, I've done every one of these now in my house. And at every stage, you know, old refrigerators are just a disaster. Even when they seem to run forever. Why do most appliances die in 5 years? And probably a lot of us have 30-year-old refrigerators that refuse to die, but they are just energy disasters. New fridges are a quarter of the power consumption of old ones. Same with old freezers. If you have an old freezer out in your garage, think real hard of whether you need it that much, because they're just a real energy disaster. And of course, all the new furnaces are just amazing compared to old furnaces. The new windows, I just put new windows in, and you know, being kind of a geek, I have an infrared radiometer that I walk around and check the radiometric surface temperature of these windows. You probably do too. And you really, new windows, I had double pane wood frame windows before. They were 30 years old, but they weren't total disasters, and yet these new ones are just direct measurement. They're just amazingly better. And so there's some real improvements that could add up if the whole community was doing these things. And I know we have things like Missoula, like what is it, the green blocks is, to me, exactly the sort of way to start exploring. How do we collectively get this done in a really massive scale, more so than just kind of house by house? One of the things I really see for the future, and of course, the big power companies, the last thing they want, is I think in 50 years, our electric power system will be stunningly decentralized compared to what it is now. When you look now at, there's probably only a couple of thousand facilities in the whole country that generate almost all the electric power for the country. The coal-fired plants, the nuclear plants, the big hydro dams, the critical word there is big. I mean, they're all highly centralized, massive facilities. I think the next 50 years is going to go the exact opposite extreme. And we're just seeing the front end of that kind of thinking, where, you know, the thought of One of the things they're talking about in California, and they're building incentives to do it, is what they call the million solar houses. They literally imagine every single house will be its own little power producer. Have you seen any, this is a wind turbine. Now, I don't recommend wind turbines in Missoula. I mean, you really have to be context specific in these technologies, and in no way do we get enough wind for a wind turbine to make any sense around here. But we all know places where it would, and you start seeing a design like that and imagine that could be on top of every house over in Browning or something like that, and you get the idea that there's small-scale power generation technology starting to bubble up, that I really think in 50 years, every single house will have its own little power production. And that completely is the opposite of what we have now. Missoula is a great place for us choosing to, as they like to call it, decarbonizing local transport. And so I think for commuting in Missoula, there's a multi-mile radius here where it really is we're a very good bike riding town, and we have the bike lanes now. One of the things people, if they don't ride bikes, they imagine us bike riders going down Brook Street or something. We never go down Brook Street. We go down the side street that parallels Brook Street, and we never battle the big traffic. And so if you know your way around Missoula, I went out to Community Hospital from the university a couple of days ago for my doctor appointment, and I barely was in traffic for 3 blocks all the way across town, because I know how to get across town on my bike. And so this is an option for transportation that Missoula is getting better and better at. And I think we can continue to do more. And once you're comfortable on your bike and you're comfortable knowing that you can ride away from traffic, you find that it's a very good option. Of course, then we still need cars once in a while. Probably this crowd all recognizes that you can buy a car right now that gets 50 miles a gallon. In fact, there's usually about a dozen of them in front of this church every Sunday. This is kind of a liberal, kind of an over-the-top. So the Priuses are lined up on Sunday morning here. But they get 50 miles a gallon every day of the week. You don't even have to try. This is not commercial hype. In fact, I haven't quite made 60 miles a gallon on mine, but it was something like 59.6. So these are cars you can buy every day of the week. They already exist. And so if you're driving a 20 mile per gallon car, you don't have to if you don't want to. One of the things that people, though, are kind of surprised to hear, though, is once you get out on the freeway, how much your speed matters. And it doesn't make a difference even whether you're driving a Hummer or a Prius. When I go 80 in my Prius, it drops from 50 miles a gallon down to about 42. And if you're driving your Hummer 80, it drops from about 6 to about 4. But the point is, no matter what you drive, the faster you go above about 60 or 65, you're paying a serious penalty in gas mileage. And so I sure try to make the habit of, when I don't have to be in a hurry, I just go slower. Now, we always sometimes are in a hurry and you just say, okay, I just have to get there. But I'm trying to do better and better at not trapping myself in that kind of schedule and just go along at 65, and it really isn't bad. And then you get 50 and 55 miles a gallon effortlessly. Okay, so I'm going to lob a couple of other of my just favorite things that I think we should do better at, and this is one of them, is neighborhood cafes. The idea that you can go meet some friends and have a dinner or a coffee without getting in a car. 100 years ago, this is the way most all American towns were designed. This is the way it used to be normally. And our zoning after World War II specifically squeezed out commercial properties from the suburbs and pushed us into the situation we are now, where you basically have to drive a couple of miles just to buy a loaf of bread. Well, we can turn that back. And Missoula's done a few. And you know, this is the kind of community that I think it has the interest and the guts to do these things, and I think we could really do more in trying to resurrect neighborhood cafes and small neighborhood markets. And I think that is part of helping people get out of their cars. I have a relatively narrow diet, but it is all locally produced. And now I think there's already a lot of success in Missoula about eating locally. Our farmers markets are really tremendous, and those are happening all over the U.S. also. I just see that all over the place, that farmers markets are coming back. And so it shows that we're at least having an awakening of the American public in some of these factors, that we're not standing dead at zero, even though it sometimes seems like we are. And more local eating, I think, is a particularly good idea. I don't want to overstate it, or else I'll never eat another fresh pineapple again. But there's an awful lot we can do, and we're already doing here. And it adds up to really making sense to reduce our vulnerability to far off countries and situations that we have no control over. Wood energy. I never thought I'd see an article about wood burning in Science magazine, and here it was just 2 years ago, wood energy in America. Probably most of you are familiar with the proposal for the university to put in a bioenergy plant. Recognize that this is not just a glorified wood stove. This is both a power plant. It produces electrical power and heat. And so this is a look at one of these of the manufacturer that we're scheduled to get. And I get a lot of questions about this biomass plant. And I particularly get questions about if it's carbon neutral or not. And it's hard to say. There's an awful lot of variables of whether it be carbon neutral, a lot of dependencies. But what I see is I, from the beginning, took a much wider systems viewpoint to that whole idea. And I'd have to say I'm the one that suggested it. So if you want to blame somebody for UM getting this, I'm the one. I'm the first one that suggested it years and years ago. So why did I suggest it? You like to hope that we'll end up with reducing our carbon footprint. But beyond that, part of what I did a lot of writing for the IPCC report was about global wildfire trends. And I'm actually scared to death that we're going to have another 1910 burn in the Northern Rockies sometime in your lifetimes. I think the probability of that is just slowly accumulating more and more. And the only way we can avoid that becoming a complete community meltdown is by being able to very actively and regularly do the kind of forest restoration and thinning all the way around the town that keeps the fuel loads at a level that is not going to carry and propagate big fires. Well, what are you going to do with all that material? You're going to just pile it up in a big slash pile like they did at Georgetown Lake? Did you see some of those dead lodgepole pines slash? Well, they were about as big as this church. And I really hoped I'd be there when they lit them off. And I wasn't. But probably my satellite could see it. I should take a look. But we really, if we're going to have an active forest restoration activity, we have to be able to do something useful with all that biomass, or else you just know it'll never end up happening. And so that has been a fair bit of my motivation. Certainly there's a lot of loggers and woodworkers that'd love to have a job. And it's definitely easier right now to just write a check to Canada and they just send us natural gas like we do now. But what happens if they build a natural gas pipeline out to the coast and then put an LPG gas compression plant in and start selling the gas on the world market and quadruple the price? They could do that anytime they want, and we would have no recourse. So you end up with an energy security issue that I think is going to get more and more significant through time. That the farther away you're getting your energy, and the more vulnerable you are to somebody else's decisions. And I like to think that this is about the most logical alternative energy option Western Montana has, is bioenergy. I don't deny that we have to figure out how to do it at maximum efficiency, but I thought that's what universities were for, is to figure out new things and solve problems. And so to me, this is absolutely what the University of Montana should be trying. And it'd be nice if I could just work through a carbon neutral calculation and say, see, it just pencils out automatically. And but I know that isn't true. It really depends on whether you're putting dead trees or live trees in it. It depends on whether you're hauling these trees from 100 miles away or 2 miles away. It depends on the water content of the wood. There's a lot of different things that are contingencies on how well that plant will work, but I certainly think it's worth a try. What I really dream about is that we could have a portable electric power generator that you could just take out in the woods and pull it up to a dead stand of beetle-killed trees and burn that wood right there on site and generate the power into a big battery or put it in the grid and never have to haul it anywhere. I know that isn't technically viable yet, but I sure would like to think that's something that we could get to for at least some areas. Another thing I see coming is this was an analysis that compared starting with biomass and either producing ethanol and then burning the ethanol in your car, or else using the biomass to generate electricity and then having an electric car. And you know what? The electric car murdered it. It was like twice as efficient. I really think the piston engine is a goner. Simple as that. I think that's 1800s level technology. We've squeezed all the efficiency out of it we have, and I think the electrification of particularly personal transport is going to just completely dominate the next couple of decades. And the sooner the better, because I've seen analysis after analysis of MIT engineering groups, and the throughput energy efficiency of our gas-powered cars is something just unbelievable, like 12%. 12% of the raw energy you start with ends up moving your car. It is just awful. And I think we're on the cusp of doing better. I don't know if you saw this, about a year ago came out, this gas turbine engine concept that they said would get, how they do these calculations, it would get like 200 miles a gallon equivalent. And it's just a dramatically different way of combusting a liquid fuel and turning it into movable energy. And I think something like that's going to be on the way, and piston engines in 30 years are going to be mostly in the museums. Now, if in 2000, what would that be? 41. If I'm wrong, I hope I'm alive and you can come laugh at me. What are we seeing that are the successes right now on a global scale? This from the Pew Trust analysis. Currently, wind is winning the electric power race. And on a global basis, there was more wind capacity put in last year than anything else. Small hydro, biomass is third, solar fourth. You don't hear much about geothermal, and I continue to watch that to see where things are at. You have to recognize that there's technologies in all this that exist right now, right today, and the only thing that's stopping them is price. And what's kind of unfortunate but true is we'd be way better off if our electric power cost 3 times as much, because then all sorts of these other technologies would become viable overnight. And so this artificially low electric power price is part of what causes the squeeze that we're in now. And I have to pay for electricity too, and you think, boy, is this guy nuts? He wants the price to triple? But you recognize that if the price triples, lots of new technologies instantly become viable, and all of us get a lot of incentive to chisel down our use even more. And there's some ways I could chisel down even more too. I'm not going to tell you what they are, but I know some. Thing that I worry about is this China is by far making the biggest investments. So while we sit around arguing in the US, China is getting the technology and manufacturing lead on all these next generation energy systems, and we'll end up buying them from them again, even when they're working off of our patents. So here's this is where I really go off the deep end. Some of the things that I think we could easily chisel down are electric power use. I hate clothes dryers. We live in such a low humidity environment that your clothes just dry automatically. You just go hang it outside in the summer, hang it on a rack in the winter, and it magically dries for free. And I've lived in Europe a couple of different times, and people don't use clothes dryers very much over there at all. Electricity is 20 cents a kilowatt hour, and they don't use much at all. Now, one of the things, when I lived in Vienna a few years ago, my apartment had one of these warming towel racks in the bathroom. And I realized that was a little clothes dryer. It worked great for drying clothes. And think what we do now. We first put all our wet clothes in the dryer, turn it on, and of course it pulls about 4,000 watts of power and heats up, evaporates all the water and shoots it out into the air. and then we turn on a humidifier to humidify our house. And you go, what? Come on. So if you do one of these, you both heat and humidify your house both. You keep the heat and the humidity in your house during the winter time, and of course during the summertime you just put it outside. I really hate gas lawnmowers. And Bob Bergen's is the worst on our neighborhood. No. I don't know, you just, I think of how many times I've gone out on a Saturday evening on my deck and I'm going to just relax and up starts somebody's lawnmower. Oh, come on. And they're actually a ferocious pollution source because, of course, they burn at a very low temperature with lots of really high emissions per unit gallon of gas burned. And so I just kind of have it in for gas lawnmowers. And I can't wait until I can get an electric lawnmower and give it a go. I haven't quite done it yet. See, there's things that I'm kind of waiting for that I haven't done that I could. And this is one of them. And I'll end by saying that we've got a climate change studies minor on campus. We go through both the climate science, all this socioeconomics issues, and then at least try to work our way through the solution sets that we see available to people today. And I think Missoula is a great sized town for having lots of options. And I think we have a lot of people that just have the energy that they're willing to put into these sort of things. So I think we're a perfect transition town type of place. And let's face it, we're experimenting for society on these things. There aren't just automatic, obvious solutions, or we'd already have done it. And so we have to recognize that some of this stuff isn't going to work, but if we don't start experimenting, we're going to just keep, sending the check to Canada for our natural gas and having the folks in Houston push megaloads through town so they can send us oil, and we're just going to continue with that sort of dependency. So I'll end with my recent favorite book, and it's called Plenitude. Juliet Schor is a sociology and economics professor, and the reason I like this book a lot is I've read a number of other books that have big global strategic analyses of a global economic theory and things like that. She talks in a very practical way about what individuals ought to go do. And she sees the same threats from climate change, from energy security, and from financial instability. But she says, all right, let's start thinking of what we can do on our own. And her overall logic, you'll see, sounds an awful lot like transition towns. One of it is a new allocation of time with less paid work. Boy, that's a lot of people involuntarily are having less paid work. Boy, both my daughters are among them. But it does give you more free time. And so what do you do with that free time? Well, then she says there's an awful lot of self-provisioning that you can then start doing things that you used to pay somebody to do, like mow your lawn. You could mow your own with your new electric lawnmower. A push mower. Yeah, I tried one of those a couple of years ago, and I wasn't going to push it very far, and I kind of ran out of steam. So a solar-powered electric mower. How's that? You only need it for an hour a week. I've got the other 7 days to recharge the thing. In fact, the way my lawn grows, I only need an hour every 3 weeks because I never water it. Well, I tried that once, but the deer ate everything. And she talks a lot about consumerism and, you know, how much of the stuff we buy that we don't need, and how much it enhances our communities to buy more things locally made and locally grown. And I just found it by far the most proactive book that I've read in the last couple of years that really tangibly says, here's what we ought to go do. And if you want to get her here for the presidential lecture series at next year, email Royce and tell him you want to hear the Plenitude lecture, because I've already suggested it, but I'm only one voice, and if they heard it from a number of other people, I'll bet we'd get her here. All right, that's it. That's all for me.
So you have some time for some questions if people are
Yeah, I'm one of the participant in one of the study groups that you mentioned. In the second study group, we started a free school at the University of Montana, decided to occupy the University of Montana and actually have some classes. In that, we don't have teachers or experts. We congregate to actually look at things like transition towns, critically do our own research, reading, and come together with sort of criticism. So we've been like looking at transition towns. So I guess I was glad to hear, Mr. Running, that you have some, like, at least some element of some concern about economics, and we talked about that. But I don't think that what I heard here tonight really actually looked at like what Alan Greenspan described as the flaw. The flaw itself is the model itself. You know, it is capitalism. I think we have to start there. The second thing is I felt like at some point you were suggesting a lot of individual solutions. I would like to be an enlightened consumer, and I would very much like to buy a Prius, but I can't. I'd very much like to go and get the $1,200 stress-free chair my chiropractor said. I'd like to get light bulbs, furnaces, and all these different things, refrigerators. But I think that my concern, the reason I was attracted to transition towns is their collective social action. It's not individual consumerist behavior, which I think reinforces capitalist logic. I think it's how do we as a community look at like actually public transportation, not biking, because biking is not convenient or even feasible for some people. I think it's saying like, what is this town going to do to address how we don't have surface trains or better bus system, how we are commuting up and down the Bitterroot rather than replacing that with a train. We're not talking about food security in that same sense. And I think transition towns to us in this group has something that a lot more to do with like social behavior, interaction, our lack of democratic voice, which is, again, takes place in settings like this where I'd be kind of curious how people would feel about these issues, maybe less so in deference to, and no disrespect an expert, but just what do people think? And that's kind of where I'm going to do that.
I can't think that I disagree with anything you said. I mean, I certainly chose a set of suggestions from what I've done personally, but I certainly didn't mean to imply those were the only options on the table. And I also, after a couple of beers, I start getting going on capitalism gone rogue, but I chose not to do that here because I didn't have a couple of beers, and you're lucky.
I'm interested in rehabilitating the atmosphere we have right now because the certification of the oceans disasters. If we don't do something, we have to do it right now. I just saw a contraption, an advert said about $900 you can buy some hardware that will yield 3 gallons of water every 24 hours by capturing water vapor. Now, is there something we can do to capture CO2? Some kind of contraption.
They
What
call
would
it
we have
trains.
to that gas into the
Yeah. Well, there's a couple of things going on that are curious about CO2 capture. And the first thing you want to recognize is the more dilute it gets, the harder it is. And so if you're going to capture CO2, you want to capture it right at the stack at coal strip, where it's coming out at something like, geez, what is it, 100,000 parts per million instead of 380? And so if you're going to do carbon capture, you start by going to these, the stack source. They're working on algae systems where you could suck that really incredibly high CO2 air off these stacks, bubble them through these algae systems, and then they have strains of algae that basically generate a lipid, a biodiesel in effect. And so there's a lot of work going on for that kind of, you might say, organic capture of CO2 that has a lot of work going on. I don't think the coal companies are doing it, but I know that's where some of the focus is. Another kind of curious part that's not unrelated is that cement outgasses tons of CO2, both in production and as it sits around. Well, there's a company in California that's trying to mimic how shellfish generate calcium carbonate by taking up CO2, and they've actually got a patent for a cement that absorbs CO2 rather than releasing it. Now, it hasn't hit the market yet, but it's kind of another one of these ideas of how we could start in a more active way sucking up CO2 rather than releasing it. So there's some interesting research going on. Nothing is ready for prime time yet, though, I must admit.
I wanted to toss out two quick ideas. One is to encourage everybody to bug National Public Radio to interview some steady state economists. They continue to have people on National Public Radio that growth is the solution, growth is the solution. It'd be nice to hear some people say growth is the problem, growth is the problem instead. So there's a group called Center for Steady State Economy, and
Can you say that again?
the Center for Steady State Economy, and I keep bugging National Public Radio programs that, like Planet Money and things like that talk about the economy, to interview some of them and not these growth economists all the time. And then the other thing I want to suggest is we have a big pile of money laying around that could be invested in a greener economy and transition and so on and so forth. And that's all our retirement money, which we're not very happy with how what's been happening with our investments. I think a lot, mine are all in socially responsible, this or that, green energy and so on and so forth, but I would really rather invest it right here in Missoula. So it'd be great if, I don't know if the city would do it or who would do it, but to have something like a revolving loan fund where we invest that's where we put our retirement money, and it gets turned into local loans that are for energy conservation, not for somebody to go buy a boat or something like that, but for energy conservation. And then, I'd be willing to accept a lower rate of return, knowing it was going into that, and frankly, it probably would be a better rate of return than we're getting now anyway. So.
I will just say that Montana Community Development Corporation, MCDC,
They say I have too little money to interest them.
they're actually trying to get them to do more cool to do that. So that's one thing that may.
I was just wondering if the graph you showed, there was a bunch of spheres that showed the difference between subsidization or subsidizing between, oil and then subsidizing renewable energy and that. If we could see that graph like we did tonight and people do, how is it not different now? Like, how are the people who are making the choices that decide that still there? And where do we...
Who do you think lobbies Congress every day of the week?
Right, why is Congress still doing what it's doing?
Yeah.
I mean, no, legitimately,
Yeah.
what is like, an expert, yourself,
Yep.
have been a part of these national studies and
Yeah.
things like, where does the voice get lost?
Well, I think part of the situation with the fossil fuel industry is they've been at this for so long that they have these subsidies and credits buried in 100, probably 1,000 different places in the tax code and in various regulatory things. They are buried so deep, so many different places that people don't even keep track of where it all is. And certainly not anybody in Congress. That's the first time I'd ever seen that kind of an analysis, that group that did that. And it was a very interesting read because they had spent a couple years just trying to ferret out every one of them, and they just couldn't believe every place they looked was another little, write-off or a credit of some sort. They have all sorts of different names for them, and so they've been at it for 50, 60, 70 years, and it isn't going to turn around overnight.
Do you remember the source of that grant?
I could look at that. I didn't have it on the bottom, but I could easily find it.
So this is going back a moment to, was it Vicky who was talking about local investment? There are some limits to small investors investing in local companies, but there is a move to change that. If you go to the Post-Carbon Institute, which is a great website, I think it's postcarbon.org or something, they're putting together an initiative right now to allow and encourage independent investors to invest in local economies, because actually you're not allowed to at the moment. You have to give your money to some big thing. So everybody go look at it, and they have a little petition you can sign up, and you know something more about it than I do, it looks like.
Yeah, well, I just got an email about it. It's a bill that Obama is considering right now, and interestingly enough, what I read is that the Tea Party is also interested in it because it will allow people to invest in communities, and according to current SEC regulation, you're not able to invest in local companies, and they're trying to change that law right now. So it would probably require some investigation because the Tea Party is behind it. But it might be kind of one of those solutions that happens to overlap because both seem to be supporting local communities more. So I'm not sure what it's called either, but it's something investment act.
I think that's the magic of the transition idea, is that it's a place where, like, the Tea Party and some of our crunchy hippie ideas actually overlap and have a common ground that might actually, because we all have to live here, might actually make sense.
I would like to use the, you were about to.
I see some rustlings, and I just want to get this out before, while everyone is still here. MCAT will show a video of this probably in about 4 weeks, is that right? So you can see this again, or we will also advertise that it will be shown again on MCAT. And then also, we'll have a meeting on Tuesday, November 29th. I will also email this out. And the purpose of that email will be to begin the organization of small groups to read the handbook. There's so much resource right here and also in Missoula, and so many good brains, and we really do need to get started. Actually, we have started. In Missoula, we've done a lot. But you were talking about plentitude. Well, another really wonderful proactive book is the Transition Handbook. It's a very exciting book, and it really has very concrete ideas. It's so positive. And if you can't afford to pay the price, another thing that small groups can do is one person, they can share a book and then copy it for the others.
I like to support local booksellers, but you can get the information on the web. There's a transition primer on the web, and you can buy it from Amazon too. But on the 29th at noon, the purpose of that meeting is to, I hope that as many of you as possible will come, because that's when we'll start organizing small groups to start getting the handbook and start forming the groups so that they will start in January, because nobody wants to do that in December. So, oh, it is available at the public library. And it's also available at Jeanette Rankin. Let's see. Oh, the meeting. Oh, it's at the library, in the large meeting room. And I thought you were talking about the book. The transition handbook, there's a copy at the library and a copy at Jeanette Rankin to loan.
Will there be any evening meetings that working folks can come to?
Yes, we'll have to have an evening meeting. This, on the 29th, the purpose of that is just to start organizing the groups that will start in January. So please come if you are interested in forming a group to read the handbook.
Also, you know, there's another new edition to the handbook.
Yes, I just got it, yeah.
And people can buy a new one, they most of them.
Well, I think they're, I just have browsed through the new one. I don't think it replaces the first one. The first one is about organizing. The second one is about what's being done, all the different groups.
I think in the interest of time, we will just take a couple more comments. Did you have something you wanted
Just
to?
quickly, I wondered if you'll be putting, I will be here on the 29th, I really like to be involved. Will you have a list of committees?
Did you sign up as you came in? If you do sign up as you at the table right outside here, we'll make sure that you get information as things progress and events that we have. Dr. Lang was mentioning at the beginning of this program our tremendous victory in keeping ExxonMobil on low path. And it's so easy to get overwhelmed by the power of the oil companies and the power of and the misuse of power by the corrupt government. But we do win. We win once in a while. So besides, there's another victory that we won just this week that's on a par with keeping ExxonMobil off low path, which is that President Obama, responding to Bill McKibben, 12,000 people getting busted in front of the White House, and 12,000 people holding hands around the White House, and the whole national movement telling him that he can't approve the tar sands, the Keystone XL pipeline from the tar sands, has delayed it for a year, and sent it back to the State Department for an honest, independent environmental study, which he said should specifically include global warming as a consideration. Now that's, you know, it would have been a better victory if he just said, no, we're not going to do it, but this is great. I mean, this is 100% because of the environmental movement and the pressure that's been brought to bear. If it hadn't been for Bill McKibben and all the rest of us, that would have just been quietly approved. So we congratulate. Okay, I'm going to let you close.
I was just going to mention, for those interested in learning and joining the other study group about transition towns, maybe you just want to know what it is. We're trying to look at it, maybe before you get involved in it. We've been kind of looking at and investigating everything from its strengths and weaknesses, and looking at other applications. Like we feel that that when we've studied a lot about it, that the criticisms are legitimate about the lack of economic, it doesn't really address what you do with labor, doesn't really address what you do with some of the social issues, democracy, these kinds of things. And so we'd like to invite anyone to come to any of the free school activities. They're in the center of the UC Commons, right in front of the bookstore at 5:30 on Thursday nights. So right before the Peace and Justice Film Series, it's about an hour we sit and we conduct a class. We'd love to have anyone come. And we literally sit right out in the open, so we can have an open classroom style. There's no teacher. We want everyone to come, participate, share ideas. And so if you're not really sure what Transition Towns is or isn't, that's a great place to come participate and learn about that. We're going to transition eventually to other topics too.
Do you have blankets?
It's indoor. Be wild. It's inside the UC Commons, right inside the Commons. Thursdays, 5:30.
I just have a small comment about Dr. Running's electric lawnmower. I actually have one, and I'm just an underemployed gardener, basically. But I have one because someone down the block had one, and I loved it. I said, oh my God, it's not chasing me out of my backyard. And I didn't even know her. And I went down and I said, I love your lawnmower. And I said, we talked, and she said, I got these dogs I can't take care of. And I said, I'll take care of your dogs. And we shared the lawnmower. We split the lawnmower up 3 or 4 ways in our neighborhood. You don't have to go buy these things. Sharing resources and building community, that is Transition Town. You can get this. I loved it. I was just at Permaculture Conference for the weekend, and this woman really struck me. She said, if you're buying grocery store food, go home and start your garden tomorrow. I say, if you don't have an electric lawnmower, if you're not a transition town, if you haven't occupied your own transition town yet, go home and start one tonight. Thank you all very much for coming.
Steve, how are you?